everyone.
Oh, good. What are you doing?
Oh, I'm just lesson planning for my psychology class.
Oh, psychology.
Yep.
So you know about psychology?
Yeah, this is my second year teaching psychology, actually.
Oh. Well, then what number between 1 and 100 am I thinking of?
That's not how psychology works, you Nimrod. Psychology is about studying and explaining and making observations about behavior so we can figure out what makes people think the way they do and feel the way they do.
Yeah, blah, 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 whatever. You read my poem.
Psychology doesn't really work that way. It uses scientific research and the scientific method to carefully conduct experiments to predict and explain what psychology is all about with human thinking and behavior.
Well, it still sounds like a bunch of crap to me. I bet next you're going to tell me that radiologists don't even talk on the radio.
Hi, I'm Mrs. Martsky, and this is Q1 Week 1 introductory video on the introduction to psychology. Each week we will have a introductory video for you to watch, and it will just be pretty much the only direct instruction that you'll have on the concept in each unit or the topic in each unit. So remember, those collaborate sessions are there for you to either dig deeper into the topic or to ask questions, get help for assignments, get some reteaching if you're still fuzzy on a few concepts, go over feedback for some of the assignments, whatever. The collaborate sessions are there for you, and they are there for what you need them to be for you to be the best psychology student you can possibly be. Therefore, I'm not going to have a prepared PowerPoint. I might have some resources available for you. If you want to check those out, that would be a great way to get some access to those resources. But right now, these introductory videos are the only direct instruction that you'll be receiving from me for this psychology class. Okay, so basically, what is psychology? What it makes up the field of psychology? How did it develop? What kind of careers can psychologists have? What are the different major approaches or theories or perspective that guide psychological research in explaining what they study? So those are all the topics we're going to be discussing in this first unit. And in order to really dig into what psychology is all about, we need to know that psychology is broken up into two words, psyche or ology. It's based on the Greek for mind or experience. That's what psyche means in Greek. Ology, you've come across that before in biology, geology, etc. Study of. So basically, we're studying the human mind or the human experience. So you could say that it's pretty much the study of human behavior and thinking. And psychologists will do that in a variety of ways. So how and in what ways do psychologists study behavior and thinking? I think it would be very helpful to think about psychology in terms of where are psychologists looking to study human behavior and thinking. And there's 3 different areas that psychologists could research this. And as I'm adjusting the size, we are going to, okay, there we go. All right, so psychologists look at human behavior and thinking at 3 different layers or 3 different concentric circles. So what that means is that any given psychologist might study just one of these areas. They might study biological causes and influences on behavior and thinking. They might look at particular individuals and what kind of life experiences that they've had that influence and cause them to think and behave a certain way. Or they might just look at how society, a person's community, the society they live in, the culture they're a part of, influences their behavior and their thinking. And so one of these is not necessarily more important than the other. When psychologists conduct research, which is what we'll talk more about next week, they're really looking at all of these three different areas. Just depends on what you want to do in psychology. If you want to be a therapist, or if you want to be a researcher, or you want to study human development, or you want to look at how people's culture and society kind of shapes and molds their way of thinking, behavior. All of those are different fields of psychology. All right, so let's look at the examples that I have here. And at this point, I really wish that I had an arrow, sorry about that. So basically, what is an example of a biological cause or influence on behavior? Well, for example, if we look at the phenomenon in psychology of depression, so that's a way of thinking, a way of behaving, and some psychologists have done research and found that actually there's biochemicals in our brain that if they're a little bit off, if they're not quite the way that they should be, that they can cause depression. Another psychologist might conduct a different study, and they might analyze, do like a case study of how the death of a loved one for one person led to that person's experience and struggle with depression. And finally, different psychologists, those sociocultural psychologists, will look at the huge, big picture of, they'll take a certain demographic, certain population, and say, okay, we know that depression tends to be more prevalent among men than, or among women than men in the U.S. Why is that? And they'll do research into that phenomenon. So there are definitely a ton of different career paths in psychology that focus on these three layers, that look at each of these three layers to analyze human behavior and thinking. So depending on what you're really interested in psychology, depending on what you want to do as a psychologist, will really determine which of these three layers or which of these three circles your career really deals the most with. Another thing about psychology is that through research throughout the history of psychology, throughout its development, there have been a variety of approaches that have developed that really influence psychologists today to form a particular opinion about what is the most influential cause of a person's behavior and thinking. Some psychologists will say really behavior and thinking is all about what is going on in the body. That's a biological approach. Some psychologists will say no, the single most important factor in causing depression or shaping our thinking and behaving is our culture. And so that's the socio-cultural approach. So we're now going to start looking at a variety of these different approaches. Two of them we've already touched upon, and that is the biological approach. And I'm going to make this bigger so we can see them. So basically it looks at how genes, hormones, and the nerves interact with our environment to influence behaving and thinking. So that these genes, hormones, nerves, the biochemicals in our brain, that refers to physiology. So anything that's going on in your body that involves DNA and chemicals is physiology. And psychologists have done research into this and found that our physiological makeup really do affect our learning, how we learn, our personality, our memory. It motivates our behavior, it motivates our emotions, and how we cope with things like stress or the death of a loved one. And we're going to talk more about the role of biology later on when we study the brain and when we look into a debate about which is more influential, biology or environment in shaping our behavior and thinking. The flip side of that debate is the environment. And so the behavioral study psychologists, this is the approach where they're really just focusing on what we can see about a person. We can only observe what's on the outside. We can only observe their behavior. We can only observe existing changes. So we learn by observing our environment, and behavioral approach says people learn by a system of rewards and punishments. And so they'll say that these rewards and punishments are what influences behavior. They're not concerned with the mental aspect, with the thinking. They think that it's not a useful study to go into the more cognitive processes and cognitive influences on behavior. Let's just stick to what we can see. The cognitive approach is kind of a reaction to the behavioral approach. And with the cognitive approach, it looks at how the brain processes, stores, and uses information, and it examines how the information that our brains process, kind of like a computer, how a computer processes information, that information influences what we pay attention to, what we perceive, what we learn, what we remember, what we believe, and feel. Later on in the kind of the last 30 years of the 20th century, a new field emerged in psychology, and it's this guiding approach or guiding principle said, hey, you know what? People are in complete control of their own destinies. They don't necessarily learn through a system of rewards and behaviors. People base their judgments on their own perceptions of what's going on in the world. And so anybody has, because they are in control of their own destiny, anyone has the potential for self-fulfillment, to be the best possible person that they can be, and that knowledge is what's going to guide and influence their behavior. With sociocultural, we touched on this a little bit before. This might be a little bit hard to see, but basically it says that it examines the influence of culture, ethnicity, gender, and socioeconomic status. So basically, how much money you make, your parents make, and what kind of social status your family has. That's what socioeconomic status means. So all of those influence how people interact with each other, how they behave, and how they think. Finally, the psychoanalytic approach. This is the one that was developed by Sigmund Freud. If you've ever heard of a psychologist before, it's probably Sigmund Freud. This was developed during the 1800s, the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it said that childhood experiences are greatly influenced the development of personality. And we're going to talk a lot about that when we study personality at the end of Q1. And the psychological problems that we have. We're going to study about abnormal psychology and psychological disorders in the second quarter. The psychoanalytic approach says, hey, psychological problems are caused by childhood experiences. So the people who adhere to this psychological approach say that the unconscious fears, unconscious desires, unconscious motivations really are the ones that are really influential in causing our behavior and our thinking. So these two areas, the psychological approaches, and then also the different layers of psychology and what are the different ways, what are the different areas that psychologists study behavior and thinking. These are the two main ideas that I really want you to focus on in this first lesson. The guided reading assignment does talk about the history of psychology, which is really important because that's where a lot of these approaches were developed, as the field of psychology developed, these different approaches were also developed. They react to each other, and all of these approaches are still very important in psychology today, and all of these approaches we're going to revisit each of these throughout the semester, and we're going to look at different studies that were conducted that really are the cornerstones of each of these approaches, and we're going to also study about human behavior and thinking through the lenses of these approaches. So it's really important that you understand what each of these approaches are about. All right, well, that is all that I have today for our introductory video. Be sure to complete that one question quiz about something that was done or said in this introductory video. It could also come from the skit with Mr. Martsky. So make sure you get that done in time to earn the extra credit for watching this video. Thanks. Have a great day.